What's up, baseball players? I'm Coach Sam Blewett. In today's video, we're going to cover pitching mechanics for youth, amateur, higher level pitchers. But I'm going to explain this as simply as I possibly can. And here's a couple of things to know. Number one, I'm going to timestamp this video, so it'll be in chapter format. So you can scan through, you can jump around, you can use this as a reference. This video is going to be long. So don't be discouraged or intimidated by it. Use it as a guide. So look in the description below where you can jump to different portions of it. So if you want to learn about the back leg or the leg kick or shoulder hip separation, you can jump to those specific chapters in this video. That's important. Number two, I'm not going to give you tremendous absolutes and platitudes about pitching mechanics because there's not one way to throw a baseball. If you look at most major leaguers, you'll see lots of similarities on the big important things. You will see many, many differences in lots of other things. Same with batting stances, same with the way you sprint or you run or you move. There's lots of core things and then negotiable things. So keep that in mind before you argue with me in the comments, which you're welcome to leave comments and I will answer them. But just keep it in mind that I'm not going to speak in absolutes. All right, so first thing, if you want to learn about the pitching windup or the stretch, I have separate videos for those. So I'm not going to go into depth on the windup or the stretch. I'm going to go kind of through the core of the delivery, but I have very in-depth videos on both of those that are in the description below. So let's start with the leg kick. So as your leg lifts, there's a couple things that I think are negotiable and are not negotiable. Number one, negotiable is height as long as it gets to this high. So what I call cereal bowl height. So if you could sit a bowl of Cinnamon Toast Crunch, which is inarguably the best cereal that's ever been created, if you can get to that height where you can eat Cinnamon Toast Crunch off your knee, then I think you're good. If you want to go higher, that's okay too, but here's the thing with leg kicks. If you get so high that your hips can't really get you into that position where you start to cruise backwards and you start to lean, it's going to start to affect everything else in your delivery. So if you want to get this crazy leg kick, you have to understand that it's going to start to sway you, and then you're going to have to undo that motion later, which makes it harder. Think about your batting stance or a golf swing. Golfers don't do weird stuff that they have to then undo later. They try to keep in the same spot and leave the important things that are in motion to be in motion. They're not going to put extra things in motion. That's why you don't see golfers do the Happy Gilmore step up, right? So when you're pitching, you need to get a leg kick. It definitely gives you more power. It helps you collect and it helps you lead with your hip, which we'll talk about in a second. But you don't have to have a super high leg kick. You can have a medium leg kick. You can get assaulted by wasps while you're doing your leg kick. You can do any of those things. But if your leg kick gets so high that it's a problem, then you need to reevaluate it because you do not want to lose stability and have to undo this extra motion because your leg kick is causing it. So that's the big thing with leg kicks. The other thing I want to explain, when I grew up, we were taught to point your toe down to land on your toe. If you look at slow motion video, the vast majority of the best pitchers in the world land on their heel or they land on their flat foot. It's very rare that you see pitchers who actually land on their toe. And if they do so, it's very slightly on their toe. Don't take my word for it. Jump into YouTube, search for Justin Verlander, who's a toe lander, one of the best pitchers ever, might be a Hall of Famer one day. Greg Maddux land on his heel. Zach Greinke lands a little bit on his toe. There's a lot of differences, and this is again why there's no absolutes. So if there's one right way to do it, people would have figured it out. But the vast majority of pitchers land either on their flat foot or they land on their heel. So it calls into question this wisdom of why do we point our toe down? Not to mention, pointing your toe down does not guarantee that you will land on your toe. It doesn't. Because basically what happens is, and there's a couple different types of strides, which we'll cover in a second, just because you point it down now doesn't mean it's going to stay pointed as you start to drive towards the plate. So that's another important thing. The last thing I want to mention about your leg kick is that typically you just want everything to gather underneath your knee. So having a leg kick where you're out here doesn't help you, and it does serve to leave you off balance. And having your leg kick underneath your butt also serves no purpose. I'm not sure that it hurts you. Justin Verlander actually does this a little bit, but I'm not sure it has any value. So I would just pick my leg up, let your knee dangle with gravity, let your foot be where it wants to be, and I would say leave it at that. But again, there's no absolutes, so take that for what you will. But I do believe those are the core things that you need to know and that you need to do and then the other stuff is a little bit negotiable. If you're having success with something, if you're Bronson Arroyo and you want to do that, then do it. But again, most people that do the Bronson Arroyo, this really big leg kick, are going to struggle to do it, whereas he was just such a good athlete and such a good pitcher that he could make it work. So again, that's why these checkpoints are checkpoints and not absolutes. The next thing, as your leg descends, your hip is going to start to lead and push down the mound to keep your weight back. This is what this looks like. So the idea of balance point is an old sort of teach, and people get really upset about balance. Well, you never balance. Well, look, the balance point in general just sort of refers to like this position here. Now, you don't really stop and balance there. Some Japanese pitchers do, and they seem to still throw pretty darn well. So the idea of like, if you stop, you like kill your momentum and you can't pitch, like that's not true, because some of the best pitchers ever, Hideo Nomo, was amazing, had a very distinct pause, and then went again. So it's not, again, it's not going to destroy your delivery. Do I think you should pause the top? No, I don't. I don't think you should do that. However, what happens once you get to the top of your leg kick, as you start to get down, you don't really stop, you don't really balance, your body stays in motion, but your hip starts to move down towards the plate. So once you get here, you don't go right back down the way you came. You go back down as you start to glide down the mound. And your hip starts to point out, and this is important because now you're trying to create what I call uphill shoulders, and I'm sure I didn't coin that term, but that's just how I refer to it, is slightly uphill shoulders, which counteracts the downhill angle of the mound. So if you don't lead with your hip, and your shoulders remain level the whole time, your shoulders will then become level with the downhill slope of the mound, and you'll be in trouble. Because when your front side is low, you'll tend to get around the ball, and that's a common reason that a lot of pitchers get on the side of it, and their arm slot tends to drop a little bit because they leak their weight forward too soon, rather than keeping it back and going down the mound with uphill shoulders, which then sort of even out and are level. So as you descend down the mound, or as your leg kick starts to go down, your hip is going to point out, and this is also going to be in varying degrees. So someone like Tim Lincecum had a tremendous hip tilt, but everyone has some amount of it. Also, it can come a little bit later. Justin Verlander's also an interesting example where he starts to go, and then his hip tilts later on in the delivery. So again, there's no one way to skin a cat. I don't advocate for skinning cats, but there's a lot of different ways to do this, but everyone pretty much does it. So as you go down, the next thing to understand is your hands. What do your hands do during your leg kick and during the pitching delivery? So your hands tend to be a timing mechanism, and they tend to rise and fall with your leg kick. If your hands are just stationary, you just tend to feel a lot more robotic. Some pitchers do like that. Again, that's okay for them if they want to do that way. But most pitchers, if you watch a major league game after this, and I hope you do, you'll see that your hands and leg essentially are almost like you could tie a string between your pinky and your pinky toe. That they go together and they pace your body down the mound together. So when there's a big mismatch, like your leg kick is kind of slow and your arms are really fast, those pitchers tend to have bad mechanics, or at least they get off in their timing later on their delivery. So these two time up together so that when you start to stride, they continue to stay in a rhythm together. That's important. So where you start with your hands is up to you. But again, you start to look at around your chest is normal. And again, take the word normal or just typical, whatever you want to call it. You could have them high, you could have them low, but they're going to have to move more because typically everyone's hands get down to around their center when it's time to go. So if you start high or you start low, okay, just understand that they're probably going to then rise and move a little bit farther, or they're going to come down to meet the center. Because pretty much everyone's hands want to get to here when it's time to separate, and the glove arm and pitching arm go their separate ways. So again, you could hold your hands out here, you could hold them here if you're comfortable. Just understand they're going to try to get to the middle at some point. So being in the middle from the get-go makes a lot of sense. It just, again, it's removing extra, perhaps unnecessary movement. But again, for everyone, it's different. Some people, that's necessary movement. Sometimes they like low because they really want to feel their hands move with their body. And that's how they work, and that's okay. So just consider general hand placement to be around your chest, not too far from your chest. But again, it's negotiable. All right, the next thing, what do the glove arm and pitching arm do as they separate? So let's cover throwing arm stuff first. So as we get here and our hands start to separate, number one, our hands are going to typically separate down, and they're going to separate on the way down. So I see a lot of young pitchers have this issue where they get to the top and their hands separate from the top, and now they're in throwing position essentially with their arm way before their lower half gets there. This is why the rhythm of pitching is important. When your hands go up and then go back down, they tend to be in the right sort of timing where they don't have too much time or not enough time. To fast forward a little bit, when you land, again, whether it's on your heel or your flat foot, we're typically going to be chest pointed back to our shortstop if we're righty, to second base if we're lefty. So our chest points slightly back. Our glove arm is going to be kind of up. It could be a little bit lower. It could be elbow bent. It could be arm straight. That's also a negotiable thing. But what's not negotiable is that our chest is closed to our target, which means it's not facing our catcher. It's facing sideways or angled back. And our throwing arm is going to be shoulder blades pinched back, and our elbow is going to be at 90 degrees or less, but not crazy less, and definitely not an obtuse angle. It's going to be around 90 or a little less, and then the ball is going to be facing down towards the ground, but our arm is going to be angled kind of at like a 2 o'clock, somewhere between 1 and 2. Not straight at 90 when you just touch down, and also not at like 3 o'clock either, because that's what we call late. All this stuff is, in my opinion, this is, if you read the ASMI's research for joint angles for pitching, that's where I've taken this stuff from. So 90 degree or a little bit less, but not crazy less. 90 degree, not a lot more, because it's obtuse angle puts more stress on your elbow. It's a longer lever. It's like throwing a pie. So it adds more stress and you throw slower. Not ideal. And then all the way in here means the arm is going to fly out a little more and your shoulder is going to have to work harder to control that extra motion. But if you're at 90 degrees, as it lays back, it's still at 90 and then it goes forward. So more of the stress doesn't have to fly around in a circle, essentially. The other thing, and I want to talk about pointing the ball. I was taught when I was a kid to point to second base. Here's the thing, if I point to second base, as I start to rotate and my arm lays back, where's my arm? It's like point over there. This doesn't make a lot of sense. If you watch major leaguers, again, jump on YouTube, Google a major leaguer, watch him in slow motion. His fingers are going to be pointed pretty much down towards the ground with his arm angled not quite parallel with the ground. So with his ball facing third base or first base for a lefty, now as they rotate, their hand is behind the ball because I'm just moving 90 degrees. That's what we want. So pointing to second base has no realistic benefit because look, my wrist is twisted and I do not want my wrist twisted here. I want my wrist behind the ball as I'm about to release it. So that's the rationale for not pointing the ball to center field, which has been a teach for a long time, which never really made that much sense. So when we land, shoulder blades are pulled back, making this big chest is back towards short, elbows at 90 degrees or a little less, ball is facing the same direction as my chest, essentially. That's a good way to think about it. So to get into that position, we're gonna separate our hands down slightly and we're gonna pull back. I have a full video on the arm action. We don't need a really long arm action, but I also don't think that this new thing about like putting it right to your ear like a catcher, I don't think that makes sense either. If you look at outfielders, they have to get rid of the ball very quick, but they also have a full longer stride like a pitcher does. And if you watch outfielders' arm actions, they're not intensely long, but they're long-ish because their feet are in the air longer as they're striding, doing their outfield pro step or crow hop footwork. Infielders, their feet are on the ground. When your feet are on the ground, you're ready to throw, no matter where your feet are. So they can pull to their ear and throw, and that's the fastest way to do it. But again, if your feet are in the air longer, I don't see any tangible benefit for being here faster, because if my feet still have to finish striding, why should I be here waiting? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So the only thing that really matters, in my mind, is that when the foot strikes, your arm is here. We don't want it late. We also don't want it here really early. And I'm not sure that getting there early and then getting there with my feet later has any tangible benefit. So again, having length, as long as it's on time, seems to be okay. It's also the way humans have thrown for forever. I feel like someone would have naturally figured out that this was the best way to pitch from a mound long ago if it actually was, rather than we have to really train people to hold their arm and not let it move. It looks unnatural, and I believe that it is, but I'm not saying that it's harmful. I just don't think it's necessary. That said, we don't want all this extra length. We don't need our arm to straighten out and then rebend, because when we're landing, our arm is going to be bent. So you have to ask yourself, why straighten my arm just to bend it again? There's also not a good answer for it. So I don't think you need to have tons of length and then rebend it. So I think there's somewhere in the middle. Life is typically gray. Life is typically somewhere in the middle. It's not one extreme, it's not the other extreme. So people have demonized these long arm swings. I also demonize the really short ones. I think it's somewhere in the middle, and that's up for you to decide for you. So when you get here, the elbow, when your hands separate, the elbow is going to be more the driver. You're not driving with your hand, because if you drive with your hand, and I'm just meaning that you lead with your hand is going to straighten your arm out. If your elbow does more of the moving of your arm, the elbow is going to allow your arm to stay bent. So I think a good delivery, and you'll see this with mine, I have length to my arm action, but I don't have extreme, like stick it behind myself length. So if you watch my slow motion video in this video, you'll see that I'm somewhere in between, but I'm a little on the long side. So I think you're going to separate, you're going to have more of a pull component and less of a reach back component. So basically, if you just think about taking your elbow to your pocket and pulling elbow back more than you think about swinging your arm out, I think you're going to do a lot better with your arm action, because again, the reasons you don't want to have too much length is if I really lengthen out and stick it behind my body, it gets very hard to get my arm all the way back through on time. And what I mean by on time is that when I'm ready to throw, I'm here, so that as I start to rotate, my arm can quickly get behind and then above the ball. If you drag your arm, which is a common term, if I drag my arm, which means I'm landing with it late, or like behind me a little bit or down here, that's dragging, because it's trying to catch up as my body rotates before it. If your arm is late, essentially it's not getting above the ball until very late in your delivery. And what happens is breaking balls tend to be loopier. You can kind of see them roll up before they go. And you tend to leave a lot of balls arm side up and into righties if you're a righty, up and into a lefty if you're a lefty. So the consequences for dragging are pretty severe. You just don't throw as hard, but it seemingly puts a lot more stress on your arm, although I don't have evidence for that. I don't have like numbers for that. And it makes your breaking stuff in your fastball less sharp, because you're not to the top of the ball behind it ready to force it downhill when it's essentially go time, when your body is sort of like in sync and ready to hit the gas and release the pitch. So all those things leading up, let's go back. As I separate my hands, I'm going to pull my elbow back more than I'm going to reach with it, and my glove arm is going to go around a half moon to get back here. Pitching is sort of rotational and linear, which means I have some rotation, like I'm rotating at my hips, but I'm also moving in a straight line towards the plate. So when my arm goes around, it's going to meet me back, kind of pointing towards the plate, but not exactly. But what I'm not going to do is point my glove to the plate, because that makes my whole motion one big line and linear, whereas in reality, I'm half rotating to get into a line. That's a big distinction. So my glove arm is going to meet my arm up here. That's why we don't want to separate here, because it's going to be the top before my foot lands. So to summarize the glove arm is going to be a combination, because it's going to go down a little bit. It's going to be a combination of down, of sort of breaking down and reaching out. It's not going to be exactly out. It's not going to be exactly up and down. It's going to be somewhere in the middle where it's reaching out and around and gaining some height as it goes to about shoulder height. But again, the height when your foot hits is a little bit negotiable. The next thing to talk about is your back leg. What does your back leg do? Your back leg is going to sort of rotate away a little bit. And what you see with all the best pitchers is they sort of post on this back leg. So they're pushing themselves away to an extent and forcing themselves down the mound with their back leg. They're not collapsing on their back leg. They're keeping this strong and some tension in that hip where it forces them down the mound. And you'll see this leg stay kneecap slightly back, then kneecap sideways, and then the foot will turn over as we go through. And this is a good time to talk about drag line. So your drag line is the line you make as your foot hits and then eventually lifts off. There's a lot of talk about drag line. I think it's really controversial because if you watch a lot of high-level pitchers, I'll go back to Justin Verlander. When he releases the ball, his back leg is off the ground. There's a lot of big leaguers who throw 95 to 100, who when they release the ball, their back leg is slightly off the ground. There are almost no big leaguers who when they release the ball, their back leg is all the way up here. So most big leaguers have a back leg that's pretty long at release, or has a little bit of bend and they're still connected to the ground, or they have a little bit of bend and they're a little bit off the ground. But essentially no big leaguers are way off the ground, which you do see with little leaguers sometimes. So when your foot lifts off the ground, that will determine how your drag line looks. I think if I could choose and build a pitcher in the factory, I would say his back leg should stay connected to the ground through release and then come up afterward. But everyone's body works a little bit different. And it's hard to argue with a guy like Justin Verlander who threw 98 miles per hour, 100 pitches a game, and had his back foot off the ground a little bit. How can you argue that he's being inefficient or that his mechanics aren't good? Maybe he could throw another mile per hour harder? Probably not. He seemed to have gotten pretty much everything he needed out of his body. There's so many examples of both bent leg and straight leg pitchers at high levels that it really just seems like it's a personal preference in the way that pitcher's body moves. So again, take your back leg with a grain of salt, but the thing to understand is if you're sinking into your back leg early, so you're going down the delivery and your back leg's caving in, that's something you want to fix. So you want to add a little bit of tension to your back leg and think about shoving yourself down the mound with that back leg a little bit. And you know, there used to be common wisdom that you just sort of fell, or that you really dropped and drive, you know, tall and fall versus drop and drive. There's no one way to do it. You don't really just fall, and you don't really like push yourself either, because the more you drop down, the more your quads get involved, and it's really just a lateral push. Your back leg does this, but because it's fixed, it pushes you down the mound. So the back leg is complicated. The biggest thing to look for is, does my back leg collapse? If it does, work on it. Try to get it to post up longer. And again, look to some videos of big leaguers and look what their back leg looks like. You'll see that it's essentially doing what I'm explaining. It stays strong and shoves them down the mound, and then it starts to turn over later, which helps store some energy, kind of wound up in their hips like a rubber band. Whereas here, that energy is gone early. Here it stays wound up. Here it kind of dissipates before you get credit for it. So that's, I think, a pretty good summary of how to think about your back leg. Okay, so let's move on to the glove arm and shoulders. So one thing that's a big problem is when we go, some young pitchers will lift their arm above their shoulder line. So when I say shoulder line, I mean shoulder head to shoulder head, across your collarbone. You don't want your arm above this. What happens is when we're above it, your elbow gets in front and then you'll push it like a dart. When your arm stays in line with your shoulders or slightly below, then as we rotate, it can climb and be ahead and you can throw hard. But if your elbow gets above your shoulder line, so if you're here at any point, and now understand that you can be well behind your body, have a really big shoulder blade or scap pinch, and that can look like from some angles like you're high above, but you're not. So be aware of your camera angles. When you're really actually above your shoulder, you can feel it pinch your shoulders because you run out of room and space in that shoulder joint to actually keep it climbing any higher. That's why you can't lift your arm that high without your shoulder blade starting to rotate. But when you get up here, this is going to cause you to really lose a lot of velocity. And that's why you won't see any major leaguers have their arm above their shoulder line. It's always level or slightly below, never above, okay? That's important. And again, the way you fix that is if your arm is lifting too much in your arm swing, it's gonna get above your head. If you're more pulling your shoulder blades back, it's gonna keep it at shoulder line or below. The next big thing to understand, when we go forward, our glove arm is gonna go kind of like palm out, like you're petting a baby elephant, like from ear to ear. It's gonna go out, and then it's gonna come down and sort of collapse into your side like this. We'll go back to like holding a bowl of cereal. So it's gonna go out, and then it's gonna fall. We're not actually pulling our glove arm back, but it is typically gonna gather into a compact position in front of us as we move our chest towards our arm. So when we get to the acceleration portion, where we're actually starting to move forward, there's a couple things that will happen. Number one is we're gonna move our chest towards the catcher's mitt as the glove arm starts to gather into our armpit. Again, we're not actually moving this back, but you'll kind of feel like you do as you sort of pull that elbow into your pocket and sort of cartwheel yourself towards the plate. Again, that's not exactly what happens, but it's a good way of thinking about it. So when pitchers want to throw harder, typically the way they do that is they pull from their elbow. That's how I do it when I want to throw harder, because it's starting my delivery from my glove arm. You don't start your delivery from your pitching arm. Your pitching arm is along for the ride. So when you get here, your glove arm starts to go first. That's when you start to rotate, your arm lags behind, and then everything goes forward after that. And your glove typically finishes in this compact position when you're releasing the ball. After that, it can unlock. And if you want to have your glove arm to just sort of fall, as long as it's parallel with your body and close, that's okay too. What you just don't want, and this is a common problem with young pitchers, is their glove arm falls out here where it leaves this big gap. And that tends to drag them off their line, and their arm tends to oppose where their arm is. So if you're out here, your arm angle is probably gonna drop. If you're down here, it's gonna keep you on top and behind the ball a little more. And that's also a good time to talk about arm action. So with your arm action and your arm angle, there's no right arm angle for everyone. Most players will be between 10 and 11 if they're righty, or 1 and 2 if they're lefty. Almost no one throws a 12, and your shoulder line is determined by the tilt that you have. So if you throw a sidearm, you're still making a line from your fingertips through your shoulder head. If you throw at 1 o'clock, you're just tilting at the waist, but nothing's actually changing between your shoulder and your arm action. But what you'll see is that I have a smooth line from my hand to my shoulder, and I don't have any bend in my elbow. I mean, you'll have a slight amount of bend, but you will not have significant bend where you can see that this smooth arm is sort of like bent and broken. It needs to be pretty much smooth all the way through at release, and then the follow through is going to come all the way back down to your backside. Last couple things to cover are what angle your foot's at when it lands. Typically, it's going to be at about 1 o'clock, and then it's going to rotate into 12 and sort of straighten as you hit, which is another reason that you want to land on your heel or your flat foot rather than your toe. If you land on your toe with cleats on, your foot's locked. Your hips are locked. They can't rotate anymore. If you land on your heel, you can continue to rotate as much as your body needs to get your hips all the way open, which means square to the plate to your target. Your hips will be closed, and then they will rotate to open towards the plate. But again, if you land like this with your toe at 2, my hips cannot get all the way open to the plate because they'll be stuck. You have about 1 clock angle. Like you can get from 1 to 12 with your ankle or your knee mobility. Like I can get a little bit here, but beyond that I run out. So if I'm at 2, I can get to 1, but I can't get to 12. If I'm at 1, I can get to 12, but if my foot opens up, then it's a lot easier and I can get there on my own, okay?
All right, so next let's talk about shoulder hip separation, and I want to do this as a voiceover rather than demonstrate it live because it's probably a little easier to show it. So here's me in slow motion. I threw a couple pitches off the mound, and keep in mind, this is 5 years after my last competitive game, so I literally haven't thrown off a mound in years, and I actually felt pretty good doing it. But let's watch here. So the big thing to look for is my chest. So you'll see my Dan Blewett logo. This is my personal logo. It's taken from my book. You see my chest is facing towards basically the shortstop. And my hips right now are facing mostly sideways. But the key here with shoulder hip separation is as I land, you can see my kneecap is facing forward and my back knee is starting to face about halfway down the third baseline. So this is also angling more towards the plate, but it's not at the plate yet. So basically my hips are facing forward at like a 45-degree angle at this point, and my chest is facing actually the opposite direction, about, kind of towards between the third baseman and the shortstop. So this is what shoulder hip separation is. It's when your hips are facing one direction and your upper body is facing the other. And because they're sort of opposing each other, they sort of wind up like a rubber band. And then as I land and I start to accelerate, you'll see my hips continue to rotate forward. So now my back knee is facing the plate and my front knee is facing the plate. Or this one's not exactly, but it's getting close as my upper body starts to come through. So this happens really quick, but the lower half rotates first, or it starts to rotate, and then the upper body comes through afterward. And that's what we refer to as shoulder hip separation. So that's an important part of the delivery to mention. And I know it's something that's often confusing in the literature. All right, so the next thing let's talk about the front leg. So what this should do. Now, again, I want you to keep in mind, I'm throwing off a dusty dirt mound with tennis shoes on. So I'm going to actually be slipping a little bit. My mechanics are different than my normal baseline because I don't have as good a traction. And that's actually a really important distinction to understand, that your cleats matter. And when you slide around, your body's going to have to do different things to compensate. So when we get to my back leg, I'll show you how that's different than my baseline. But with the front leg, here you'll see that I have a pretty shallow angle. And most pitchers, when they touch down right there, are going to be somewhere in this angle here. This is like a 135-degree angle. If my leg was completely straight, it'd be like 180 or 0, whichever way you want to think about it. But most pitchers, you won't see them with a 90-degree knee where they're kind of sinking in. You'll see them with this higher knee angle, like 135 degrees, something like that. And the exact angle doesn't matter. It varies from pitcher to pitcher, but most of them are like this, where they're closer to straight than they are to completely bent. Now, as you accelerate, you'll see that my leg doesn't sink in. It's not like I'm sinking down into it. It braces, and it's still mostly stiff as I hit, and that front leg takes weight. So you'll see it's not going to sink anymore at this point, and it's still like maybe 120 degrees or something like that. So here, this is important. This front leg has to be stiff, and as we accelerate the ball, this is going to be a difference between pitchers. It's going to either stay stiff, so you see it didn't move at all, and now it's starting to straighten slightly towards the end, and it'll either straighten after ball release, like mine does finally, or it can straighten as you're accelerating the ball, which is probably better, but a lot of pitchers do it either way. So if you look at major leaguers, you'll see all of them look like me with my front leg. You'll see almost 0 of them sink down into their front leg, and you'll see many of them straighten that front leg as they're accelerating the ball. So that's essentially what the front leg does, but it needs to be firm and brace against the ground, whether it's straight or has some bend still. It needs to be firm so that you don't lose energy by sinking down into a lunge position. You don't want to have that. And a lot of young pitchers do that. They'll hit, and then they'll start to sink at this knee where it almost looks like they're lunging. And you're going to lose power, and your arm path is going to change, because as you're sinking down and you're trying to go above the ball, those two things kind of fight each other. All right, so I mentioned drag line earlier. Let's talk about the back leg a little bit. You can see here, see how my back leg starts to turn over? And I'm staying connected to the ground for a while. I'd probably like my heel to stay down a little bit longer. But in general, again, the stride is mostly a sideways push, so this leg should be pretty long, like mine is. And then it's going to turn over with the rest of my hips, and then it's going to start to disconnect forward. So I talked about the back leg earlier, and you see my back leg comes off. That's actually not normal for me, but you'll see many hard-throwing major leaguers, their back leg comes off like this. I think this is because I was not wearing cleats, because this is something I've never seen myself do in the past. Also, I haven't thrown a ball in years. So let's look at another one. I've got one from the windup right here, and you'll actually see my back leg is different. And probably because my stride lengthened out a little bit, I probably had a little bit, maybe like a little more stable landing where I landed. But you'll see on this one, my back leg is still connected to the ground. So there's not one way, again, to throw a baseball. And, I'm dragging on the ground, so my drag line is changing a little bit. But it's important to understand, and again, we talked about the glove arm earlier, so you'll see that here. See my glove arm, it's not moving back behind me, but it's just becoming compact as my chest moves towards the plate. And this is another thing I want to cover, that pretty much all high-level pitchers, as they start to accelerate the ball, you'll see this arch in their back, and then you'll see their trunk, their upper body, start to move forward towards the target. So you see how my chest pushed forward, and now I'm making this long angle with my body. That helps move you towards the plate, and you get some power out of essentially your lower back curling and then uncurling. So that's important to understand. The next thing I want to cover is on your follow through. So what your back leg does, because I get a lot of questions about that. with your back leg is just dissipating force. And what I mean by that is when you wind your hips up like a rubber band, like we talked about with shoulder hip separation, they've got to unwind at the end. So once you rotate through, my back leg is going to kind of finish rotating around because it's the energy has to go somewhere. So your back leg won't typically just shoot straight through. It'll typically go out and around kind of like a semicircle because you were rotating like a semicircle. So my follow through of my back leg is pretty typical. You'll see that with most players. So you don't need to try to make it do that. If your hips are rotating properly, then, because again, you can see them rotate through, then it'll happen on its own. So a couple other things to focus on from this front angle. Again, you'll see my glove arm falls down compact. So vertical glove arm, so it's close to my body. My upper arm is vertical. You'll see the tilt made by my shoulders and how my arm extends that line all the way through. So you don't see like a big dip in my elbow. It's pretty much a smooth line from shoulder all the way up to fingertips. That's important. And that line again is made, as I explained earlier, from shoulder to shoulder, follows all the way up. So the higher arm slot just means you have more trunk tilt. And then the other thing I want to touch on with follow through, because you need to follow through really hard, follow through, get every last little bit of the baseball, but your arm should also bend towards the end, which you'll see there a little bit. And you don't want it to stay locked forever. And this was explained to me at a ASMI conference. Basically that if your elbow stays locked all the way through, your bicep and your shoulder have a harder time handling that force as your arm slows down. And then your bicep tendon connects to your labrum in your shoulder, so it can put a little more stress on your shoulder and your labrum. So once you get to the end, I know you can't see real well here, my arm bends a little bit, and that helps to sort of like dissipate some of that force. And understand that my mechanics are not perfect. Like, I was a pro pitcher. I threw pretty hard for being a 6-foot guy. I got a lot out of my body, but there's no pitcher that you can watch their mechanics and say, oh, he's perfect. Everyone does things a little bit differently. There's some things that if I could have gone back, I would have changed. I was constantly improving my mechanics, and you should work to do the same. But the goal of any pitching coach is to teach the kids they work with better than they knew when they were a player. And I think I do that. There are definitely some things that I do that I wouldn't want other kids to do, that I am not just teaching my own mechanics, but I'm trying to teach the best version of mechanics in general. And of course, that amongst all, pitching professionals or whatever you want to call them is going to vary. So there is subject to some interpretation. All right, that's going to do it. So this was a long video. I intend this again to be a reference guide. So if you're a parent, player, or coach, I hope this was really helpful and you can go back through it, and use this for years to come. I know there hasn't been a really long sort of guide to pitching mechanics here on YouTube, so I wanted to put that out there for the world. If you want to support the channel and you want to learn more about your game, in the description links, you'll find my free pitching development checklist, which is a great way to compare what you're doing to what you could be doing, so you make sure sort of all your bases are covered. There's my online strength training program, which is called Early Work. It's a great monthly baseball program if you need a strength training program to follow with arm care, all that good stuff. There's my pitching book, Pitching Isn't Complicated, my memoir, Dear Baseball Gods, and my new books that are in the works. I'll have a third out in early 2022. And of course, my pitching courses, which extend the knowledge that you found in this video here. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.